Squid Game Season 3 is all over the place. I really like the character work, the games, the psychological components, a lot of the themes I'm on board with, but there's a lot of head-scratching story decisions, a lot of things that were left out that should not have been. We kind of get some late recontextualizing of entire story parts like the organ harvesting. A lot of the motivating factors for the story and the characters end up leading nowhere and could have been cut out whole cloth. So overall, while I found it enjoyable and I liked some of the payoffs for the characters, it definitely left a lot to be desired. And I think it's better that it ended now than that it continues going on. Of course, the idea of it ending now is debatable based on the end of this season. But even still, viewing season 2 and 3 as just part 2, it's weaker than season 1. The antagonists are a lot more annoying. The time we spend on side characters and side plots outside the games largely feels wasteful. There's plot armor, a couple decent moments from it, but it really would have been great if we just spent 95% of the time with the characters in the games and just fleshing out those relationships, their morals, their motivations, and gotten to know them better as they died off. I'm not going to bother with a full plot synopsis for this one. The plot boils down to everyone dies, Joon-hee has her baby, and Gi-hoon sacrifices himself for the baby to be the winner at the end. But then a lot of the ending is just open. The front man gets away, the detective does nothing, and then we get left with Cate Blanchett as a teaser for some kind of American Squid Game. So I'm pretty much just going to go through the things that I like and dislike throughout the season. Let's just get into it. And the one thing I'll say about the detective plotline before I even go through the stuff that I actually liked is that it fucking leads nowhere. Dudes were on a boat for 13 fucking episodes, and then by the time they get there, the front man blows up the whole operation on his own. And Joon-ho gets stuck with Joon-hee's baby and her 45 billion won winnings. There's no resolution between the brothers. There's no payoff there. Just a mind-boggling decision for that entire plot line. So the first game is this kind of hide-and-seek tag hybrid game where if you are a hider, you get keys and you can try to hide. And if you're a seeker, you get a knife and you have to kill one person to pass. And because I'm terrible with names and there's a million of them, I'm just going to label the characters by their descriptions. So the nice older lady, I believe her name is Goomja, with her annoying ass son, get split up. He gets a blue vest, which is a hider. She gets red, which is a seeker or a killer. And the baby daddy of Joon-hee and the crazy drug addict guy who was Thanos' friend are also on the red team, along with Gi-hoon, and the military coward guy is on the blue team, so he's a hider. And Gi-hoon is blaming him for their little revolution failing, so he wants to seek him out specifically. So the baby daddy and the crazy guy get the 2 kills that they need in order to pass. And the baby daddy has a pretty downward trajectory from this episode on. It kind of seemed like he wanted to be involved with Joon-hee and the baby, and then he just gets consumed by greed throughout the season. So he accidentally ends up killing the trans character who was protecting Joon-hee and the older lady as she went into labor. He didn't realize who it was. Pretty tragic, a really nice payoff, I think, for both characters, where this kind of expedites his downward spiral. And for the trans character, ends tragically where she was protecting the old lady and Joon-hee having the baby, when last time she had chosen to continue the games and their friend ended up dying. So the fact that she ended up dying here, I thought was a pretty nice payoff, even though it was pretty brutal. And the actor that plays the trans character, by the way, is a great actor. One of my favorite Korean shows, or really any show, is The Glory, and he's one of the antagonists. He's a dick in everything I've seen him in except for this show. He's always really good. The super annoying mystical swindler lady is saying that there's a hand of God guiding her, blah, blah, blah. We see the old guy who's just an absolute piece of shit, like throw one of the people he's with to the wolves at one point, covers himself in fake blood to hide at one point. And part of the hiding team is if you have all 3 shapes of the keys, obviously triangle, circle, square, and you find the exit door, you can escape into safety. So you don't have to hide the entire half hour. So she finds this door, goes and gets the old guy who has the other 2 keys, and the old greedy man steps in, grabs a key out, and locks her out as a betrayal. Because his entire thing has been ramping up the value of their payoff every round. I thought that was a really great character moment for him, just as an absolute piece of shit. He kind of reminds me of the guy in Train to Busan who's insufferable. And I'm also glad the show has has the balls to commit, where this little annoying dick kid ends up killing her. It doesn't just lead to nothing. And the show has a lot of balls throughout the season. It just has a lot of insane decision making along the way. Gi-hoon is essentially just done at this point. He's kind of catatonic for the first 2 or 3 episodes. He sort of just feels like there is no winning, there is no hope. Obviously, at this point, he's seen like 800 people die, and he just can't take it anymore. It's like his low point as a character, I would say, throughout the series, really. And he blames the fake military kid for their trying to overthrow them with guns failing. Obviously, as the audience, we know that's not the case, but I think it's a fair response for a character to have after a terrible situation like that where he led them into their deaths. And then because it was all people who wanted to quit the games, they're overwhelmed for the votes as well. So they will continue to the end. And he ends up losing his knife as they fight and choking the guy to death who was previously wounded, and then just kind of stumbling off. A pretty brutal episode all around, but for Gi-hoon in particular, I think. Because even after he's done this, he still wants to kill himself, but the guards won't let him. And the one that kind of steals the episode is the relationship between the mom and the dorky-ass kid. Obviously, he tried to sacrifice her in the Mingle game. She forgave him pretty quickly because she prioritized him over everything else. Even here, they only switched because he said he'll kill somebody quickly and then come to protect her and Junhee. Obviously, it's never that simple. So he runs into them with time getting low. They're at the exit door with all 3 keys, and he tells his mom to get out of the way so that he can kill Junhee so that they can go on together. Thematically and character-wise, this is maybe the most emotional payoff of the season, I think. She went along with all his shit to try to keep him alive, make his life better, help him pay off his debts. And the son is kind of an idiot and just keeps doing stupid shit throughout the seasons. And even at the end here, she's like, just stab me, it's fine. Like, I'd rather you go on than myself. And he refuses, and because he wants to kill Junhee, essentially killing her baby by proxy, she ends up stabbing him in the back. And it's just a brutal payoff where she's willing to sacrifice her own life for her son, but she's not willing to let her son become a baby murderer or the murderer of a pregnant woman right in front of her. In episode 2 and 3, we see the VIPs come in again. They're less annoying this season, but it sounds to me like they're trying to speak English in a way that's designed for the Korean audience to hear it, so that when we hear it, we're like, this is awful, because it sounds like a bad dub. But I think my bigger issue with them is that they largely just don't add anything. They're almost there on behalf of the viewer to give like half-ass shitty commentary when we can already see what's going on. And really just to get your social commentary in of how evil rich people are. They get off on all the poors dying. They're willing to have a baby die in the game. They don't care. They're just really extraneous. And if they were gone, the show loses nothing. So I'm kind of surprised that they repeated that mistake from season 1, because I haven't heard a single person who likes the VIP parts. And the little side plot for No Yule, I think is how you say her name, the chick who's working for the Squid Game people, everything about her side plot character-wise and conceptually, I'm actually okay with. But all of the execution is like meh. She's kind of plot armory. We don't find out her motivations until right at the end. It's a very weirdly structured part of the story, and it does serve as one of the more positive moments at the end where she saves the single dad who had the sick daughter, and he's able to take care of her to end the show. And we see her interact with the black square face guy who's seemingly the second in command. He kind of runs the show for all the shaped people. This actor is also very good. He plays Choi in My Name. He plays a cop, I think, in a show called Bequeathed. That was But My Name is very good. Definitely recommend that one. And he's very good in it. And we get a pretty emotional moment from the mom who just killed her own son, where she gives the backstory and talked about how when she was upset, she said she regretted having him. And then when he overdosed, she prayed to give anything to not lose him. All really good mother-son stuff. It kind of gets Gi-hoon to wake up, and also leads to another super sad moment where we see that she hanged herself overnight. Super tragic. And again, I definitely have to praise the show for having the balls to go through with these kind of plot lines to what I think is a realistic conclusion. And this also leads to Gi-hoon helping Junhee, who rolled her ankle in the previous game, and making the baby daddy more jealous. And he kind of just is unraveling this entire last 3 or 4 episodes. I was really hoping he'd have a bit more of a redemption arc instead of a villain arc, but he ends up being a hateable piece of shit, that's for sure. This leads to the next game, which is very big jump rope. And I thought this might be a boring game and that the jump roping was kind of slow, but the way that it works is really good. And I was pretty pleased with how they used a simple game pretty effectively. And I definitely like this one a lot more than the glass bridge, which kind of felt just like dumb luck and bullshit. We finally get rid of Thanos' friend, who was obnoxious and annoying, and we're still left with the cowardly kid who got the hot chick killed in season 2, who's now like a druggie who's also super fucking annoying. But at least we're getting rid of some of these assholes. So Gi-hoon takes the baby and braves the jump rope bridge, and then he says he's going to go back for Joon-hee before the 20 minutes is up and grab her. You can obviously see where this is going. And I really like how this devolves, where this second guy who crosses the bridge waits for people to get across and then just fucking Spartan kicks one right in the chest so they can't cross. And he's like, look, we can get it down to just the two of us and split the money and go home. Very logical, but man, what a fucking asshole. So this obviously leads to a lot of chaos where people are just stuck on the bridge jumping up and down. Some of them getting tired and getting hit, some trying to turn around and falling. And eventually Gi-hoon says, if I push you in the back, it'll just be me with the money. So the guy pretends to back off and then tries to tackle Gi-hoon into falling off, which leads to him getting hit by the rope and getting swung off. Immediate karma. The baby daddy tries to talk to Joon-hee about getting across, and she just hates him. And there's not enough time for Gi-hoon to go back for her, so she just kills herself and accepts that she has to do whatever she can for the baby. Really sad, but another really good character moment. And these are just spread throughout the season. It's just unfortunate their screen time is kind of minimized by the detective bullshit, by the girl working for the Squid Game people. We don't really do anything interesting with the front man this season, which is frustrating. Just not a great use of time throughout the season. So now they're down to like 9 of them, and the baby is being counted because the VIPs think it'll make it more interesting to let the baby take over 222 for Joon-hee. And the rest of the guys are like, give us the baby, we'll kill it. And that'll be 8 people to split the money with instead of 9. And the Squid Game people say no more violence is allowed. My wife thought this was too much and these people were just fucking terrible. And I agree, obviously, that they're terrible. They want to kill a fucking baby. But I do like it thematically that it just shows how consumed by greed people become. And at this point, you could argue whether or not they're even desperate or they're just greedy for the money. And each of them will get, when it translates to US dollars, is like 400,000 to 500,000 more. So essentially, they're all willing to kill a baby for $500,000, which is just ruthless. And we get a bit of dark humor here where they do their fancy meal. They bring out a bottle of formula for the baby. They make the baby's vote count as abstaining every time. And then we get maybe the most wasteful scene of the season as far as potential, where Gi-hoon goes to meet the front man. He reveals himself as In-ho, and Gi-hoon doesn't really question anything. He's just kind of pissed off, kind of in shock. Pretty much the scene just boils down to the front man offering Gi-hoon a knife, saying that these guys drank their fill, they had plenty of food, they're all sleeping heavily, and if you don't kill them, they're going to target you and the baby in the final round. So you should do it to take out the trash and protect yourself and the baby. And then we get a flashback of the front man doing exactly this, and that's part of his background, how he got to where he is, his mentality. There seems to be kind of an undertone of him viewing what he's doing as just, or at least correct, because of how desperate the situation is. And we see Gi-hoon in the same position, chooses not to do it. Thematically, I think it's really nice that no matter how dire the circumstances are, he won't stoop to that level. He chooses to be a good person. He chooses to do what he thinks is right, even knowing what it might mean. And it's just another divergence between him and In-ho. And I think it really plays well into his entire arc of wanting revenge against the Squid Game people, to kind of being down in the dumps with despair because he failed and realize that he can't just overthrow the system by himself, to choosing to be a good person and kind of hold on to hope and do the right thing no matter what, because that's who he wants to be. And this will probably be the last time that I talk about No Yule's arc or the girl who's working for the Squid Game people, because this part I actually do find interesting, where she's talking to the black square face guy in charge, and he talks about how he thought that she understood him better. They're both defectors from North Korea. His child died because there was no kidneys available. And he's like, look at these people down there. There's hundreds of them ready to go. So I like the idea of him working for the Squid Games and doing this organ harvesting kind of out of frustration that he lost his child exile due to an organ shortage, when in his view there's plenty. But this is another thing to me that probably should have been brought up like episode 3 of season 1, not fucking 1 episode before the end of the series and right before this guy dies, which his entire death is very Bond villain monologue-y plot armor bullshit. And I also like that we finally get her motivation, that she's also a North Korean defector and lost her husband, believed her kid is dead, even though she's still spending money to look for him, that she's willing to do something unsavory because of how important it is to her to save her family. And thematically, I think it plays in nicely at the end when Gi-hoon chooses to sacrifice himself for the baby. She's about to kill herself, but chooses to live, playing into the whole message of hope and hope in the future and the children and all that sort of thing. But again, the entire execution for all of this stuff is just abysmal. And then we're finally on to the last game, which is essentially the 3 shapes very high up, and they have to push off 1 living person each round to advance. And again, the psychology behind all this stuff I think is super interesting for these games, because if they kill Gi-hoon and the baby, who are the easy targets, then that means 1 more of them has to die along the way. But if they can separate the baby and Gi-hoon, then they'll have to kill 1 less person on their own. And the baby daddy uses this as an excuse to buy time and push off the drug addict guy, which the show plays up as this really dramatic thing. I was just like, thank God, fuck this guy. And it is a bit of a bummer that you're just left with essentially Gi-hoon and all assholes at the end. But I think the idea that that's reflective of how things work out in life sometimes, that just the shittiest people thrive or get to the top in certain environments, is at least fitting thematically, even if not super fun to watch, because at this point you just hate everyone. And for me, even this late in the story, I was still hoping for redemption for the baby daddy. And he kind of starts off like you're going to get it, but then he just goes off the rails. So the second round, they try to trick Gi-hoon into separating from the baby. They say they'll draw lots. And then they try to just grab him, bring him to the center so they can separate the 2. And the baby daddy steps in with the pole and shoves one of their guys off with like 8 or 10 minutes left in the round. And again, the psychology here is really interesting because they don't want to just fight because then they'll all die, but they also need at least 2 people to get through. So they end up picking the weakest guy in the group and just fucking him up so that he's barely alive, with the intent to drag him across the bridge and then throw him off. And Gi-hoon says, no, let's draw lots. And it devolves into a little scuffle between 4 of them. And the baby daddy kid continues to be an idiot, shoves off number 100, who's like the biggest asshole in the whole show. And while I was glad he died, it wasn't a super satisfying death, but it also sets up for the injured guy to just choose to kill himself because he's like, I'm not going to let you use me that way, leaving only the baby daddy, baby, and Gi-hoon to go to the final platform. So the baby daddy at this point just embraces being a colossal piece of shit, grabs the next pole, and refuses to let Gi-hoon cross the bridge. And he's essentially like tossed the baby over with the intent of him throwing the baby off for the last round and taking the money for himself. And Gi-hoon's like, fine, I'll just stay here with the baby and we'll all die because you won't get any money and there'll be no one for you to push off. Gi-hoon even says that he's willing to be the last death, but at this point the baby daddy's just so crazy he doesn't believe him. And he starts accusing him of sleeping with Junhee and all kinds of weird shit. So he tells Gi-hoon to set the baby down and then back up, which he agrees to because the bridge has a timer. And while the baby daddy grabs the baby, Gi-hoon runs and jumps across, and those 2 start fighting. But because they haven't pushed the button, the round hasn't actually started yet. After their little scuffle, Gi-hoon eventually drops the baby daddy off the side, so now it's just him and the baby, and he has to go start the round, with one of those 2 having to die for there to be a winner. So he puts the baby in the middle of the platform and talks to Inho, knowing that he can hear him, and says that humans aren't just horses to be gambled on. And then he jumps, leaving Junhee's baby as the winner and defying the front man all the way to the end, while also kind of having a nice little redemption arc for himself because he's acknowledged that he was a shitty father to his daughter. So he steps up for someone else's. And I think it's also just a really nice payoff of how committed he is to doing what he thinks is right, even at the cost of his own life in this completely absurd situation. And we get some kind of mixed messages at the end. The cops are there, the Squid Game people know, so they self-destruct the entire island. No evidence of the game's behind. detective plot rendered completely useless. Inho escapes, but we see that Sae-byok's brother is alive. We see that No Yule's child might be alive, so she's going to China to see if they are. The single dad has a healthy daughter now. So a pretty big theme of putting your hope in the future and in children and the sacrifice of parents or parental figures and all that sort of stuff, I think works really well with the show. Unfortunately, it's couched in a lot of dog shit. We see that Gi-hoon's daughter resents him in California. Inho delivers his uniform and a card with all his money that he had won. And it seems like Gi-hoon's actions had some kind of effect on him, but we don't really get to see any of that. We get the weirdest cameo ever of Cate Blanchett playing Doc G with a homeless guy in California. And presumably the games have either been going on there or are starting up there. And from Inho's expression, it's not quite clear to me which. And that's it. Overall, I found it really frustrating that Gi-hoon's revenge and taking down the games kind of amounted to nothing. The detectives wanting to find the games and arrest them and hold them accountable made them self-destruct, but they're still going on. I don't know if the intent was a nihilistic message about how the elites always get away with everything. There's not really any consequences for them. The poor people will never matter to them until they're an inconvenience. It's not clear to me that was the intent, but that's kind of how it comes across. There's also the aspect of Gi-hoon kind of accepting that he can't overthrow the entire system, so he has to live as best as he can within it, which I think is interesting, but not super explored because he was kind of in a coma for half this third season. Overall, if this guy keeps writing Squid Game variants or spin-offs or whatever, he should probably really stick to the games and let someone else dictate the overall story and world building. I thought the season was pretty entertaining, some really good moments. It just felt like it wasn't a great use of time in many senses, and there were some decisions that just don't make sense. You want Gi-hoon and Inho's reunion to be a big, emotionally impactful kind of turning point in the show, and it's just sort of nothing. To me, that's not quite as bad, but the equivalent for Squid Game of not having Luke, Han, and Leia together in the sequel trilogy. These are things that seem really obvious to me of directions you want to take a story, and this show just doesn't do it. And then we spend time on shit that no one cares about, that doesn't make a ton of sense, and feels just kind of thrown in to pad the runtime. Probably better than most things coming out right now. Definitely disappointing in comparison to season 1, which I would say is plagued by a lot of the same issues outside the games. But it is what it is. I guess we'll see if we get some kind of dumbass American spinoff. I'm going to leave it there for this one. If you've seen the show, let me know what you think. I try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.